Greetings. I'm Bertram Souza, veteran Mahoning Valley journalist and host of the Scribbler podcast. I'm also the author of the book No Holds Barred that provides important insight into Republican Donald Trump's first term as president and his record in the Mahoning Valley, including his role in the closing of GM's Lordstown assembly plant. The book can be purchased at thescribblergroup.com or at Barnes & Noble bookstore in Boardman. The race for president has entered unfamiliar territory. The Democratic presidential ticket is unsettled as a result of President Joe Biden dropping out. Biden has endorsed his Vice President, Kamala Harris, to head the ticket. On the Republican side, former President Donald Trump, who's the party's presidential nominee, is being hailed by his supporters as God's chosen one because he narrowly escaped an assassination attempt during a political rally. The assassin's bullet grazed his right ear. Trump and his vice presidential running mate, freshman U.S. Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, were given a rousing send-off at the end of the four-day Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a battleground state. It didn't matter to the delegates that Vance once referred to Trump as America's Hitler. Vance also said he was a never-Trumper. So what's to be made of all this? I'll ask my guests today, veteran political observers and familiar names in Ohio politics. Dr. Bill Binning, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Youngstown State University, is a former chairman of the Mahoning County Republican Party and once was an Ohio GOP insider. And Dr. Tom Sudduth, retired veteran political reporter for the Plain Dealer, who teaches at Ohio University. Tom continues to write a column for the newspaper and online edition. Thank you, Bill and Tom, for joining me to provide your perspective on all of the recent developments in the presidential race. Bill, let me start with you. The last time we were together, you and I and Brent, and I'm sorry that he wasn't able to join us, we predicted that Joe Biden would be giving up his bid for re-election. You, Bill, said that Biden would have no choice but to endorse Vice President Kamala Harris for the top of the Democratic presidential ticket. So the question to you, and then Tom, I'd love you to weigh in as well. Did Biden wait too long in making his decision? And then does Harris have, who's the presumptive nominee, have enough time to find a running mate and launch a national campaign?
That's a lot of questions.
Yep.
First question: Did they wait too long? Well, who knows? This is the end of July. There's plenty of time for this campaign, this election to unfold, and there's been a lot of dramatic developments, more than usual in a presidential campaign. And maybe we're in that kind of a cycle. Maybe there'll be more. Something else dramatic, a failed debate, a candidate withdrawing, whatever. So a lot of things can happen between now and November. It's very early, Bertram, before. So I think that leads to the answer to the second question. Yeah, sure, she has time to pick a running mate and develop a campaign. The Republicans will fight her all the way, but I mean, she already has she has Biden's campaign infrastructure, right, and his money, some of his money, considerable amount of money. So she's well ahead of the game. It's not like she's starting from the beginning. She's stepping into a role. One thing she needs to do is get a running mate. Now I'll talk more about that later.
Right, we'll discuss that. Tom, you weren't with us the last time, so had you predicted that that Biden would step aside and give us your thoughts about what has transpired?
Thank you. I don't think that I predicted it either way because, excuse me, because I have watched him for many years and suspected, as is true of many other office holders at the top of the ladder, that he has such a substantial self-regard that he would be unlikely to withdraw But it seemed to me that last week or so that it was becoming increasingly inevitable. I also would say that that not providentially, but coincidentally, the timing of his announcement was such as to, intentionally or not, draw some attention away from Mr. Trump's near-death experience.
Yeah.
And I think that probably, as much as anything, was, again, happenstance, but it changed the discussion somewhat nationally about the whole presidential race and so forth. Finally, I think that if this had to happen, and I don't care either way that it did or didn't happen, but the fact this had to happen, the timing probably was optimal because of the fact that, and also his decision-making about Vice President Harris was likewise optimal because of the fact that it appears, pending the lawyers going to court over something, that she and her campaign inherit the infrastructure of his campaign pretty much totally, given for money, employees, headquarters, and so forth. I think if he had simply thrown it open to any comers that wanted to make a race, it would have been much more risky than it has turned out to be so far. But as we know, this is so early. It isn't early to the public, but it's early to anybody else knowing the way campaigns unfold.
Yeah. So before we get into the whole Kamala Harris campaign, and also talk about J.D. Vance, let me, since we weren't, let me talk about Donald Trump. After, as you framed it, and it talked about his near-death experience, and I'm sure you guys watched, as I did, the Republican convention in Milwaukee. Donald Trump's supporters are calling him a hero for having survived the assassination attempt. The bullet grazed his right ear. Will he be able to ride this hero worship on the campaign trail? And I ask that because I recall, and you'll both recall, that his comments about the late U.S. Senator John McCain, a Republican as well, who Trump said was not a hero because he had been captured and tortured by the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War. Does this hero status work for Donald Trump in the election, Tom?
I don't know. That's a very good question. I've wondered about it. It seems to me that Mr. Trump is such a shapeshifter, politically, rhetorically, and every other way, performatively, that it is almost beyond our potential to look at his contradictions and so forth, because he seems to embrace them, and so do his followers and his fans and his voters. I think that what struck me about the whole episode, besides the fact that it was, of course, a heinous attempted murder, was that in some respects, when I saw the video of the attempt, I thought to myself, given how he conducted himself at the time, this election's over with, because he seemed to be unflappable in the face of lethal danger. And I give him credit for that as a human being. But I am beginning to wonder if that sort of bump his campaign got, again, just serendipitously, because of his bravery in the face of danger, was not more transient than I suspected it is, because it just seems as if the whole pace of this campaign has accelerated dramatically in the last 10 days or so.
Right.
Because of the fact that Vice President Harris is drawing all the attention because of the suspense about a running mate, and because of the fact that, of course, we keep forgetting Mr. Trump's running mate is also newsy in himself.
Right.
So I'm not sure, frankly, where this all leaves us.
Bill?
Well, I think that reflect on Trump. One of the things I like to remind people is you have to remember that Trump was he was a successful television personality.
Yes.
He
Yeah.
has some acting ability,
Yeah.
and he comes across good on screen.
Right.
And you could, I mean, maybe this is a reach, but you could see that innate ability by the way he handled the shooting,
Yes.
because he didn't cower, he stood up, raised his hand, he
Right.
said, I mean, that is instinctively brilliant in order to maximize it.
Yeah.
Blood all over his face. And of course, you know, he's carrying it on now because he's wearing the biggest bandage he could find on his head. But the point of it is
Right.
you have to give him credit for that. It was instinctive. He didn't think about it. He didn't have some campaign manager telling him what to do. He knew exactly how to maximize his opportunity. So I give him full credit for that. How long that lasts or to what benefit that is going to be. Like I said, you know, this has been a surprising presidential election.
Yes.
We never know what's around the corner. And so, as Tom pointed out, in some ways that seemed so dramatic in the whole campaign that all of a sudden Biden withdraws and Harris is the presumptive Democratic nominee, and Trump's on the sidelines this week. And so we don't know what the storyline is going to be next week. And a lot of things seem out of control. They're not necessarily under control by the candidates or their campaigns. It seems like there's events that just continue to occur that disrupts this campaign, or the conduct of the campaign.
And you know, so given that image of Trump, you know, jumping up and with his fist raised and saying "fight," how does that play on the campaign trail? I mean, obviously they've got stuff that they are publishing and you know, printing and T-shirts and all of that with that image, but after that incident, there was talk that Trump was going to become this kinder, gentler candidate, that he was not going to be the bomb thrower, right? So everybody's watching the convention, and you're thinking, okay, the reporters were all who got, you know, the copies of his speech, of his acceptance speech, said, oh, this is a very soft touch, you know, this is a different kind of candidate. And he gets to the lectern, and the next thing you know, he goes off text, off script, and goes back to his old self. Was that a mistake, do you think, or is that the kind of red meat Republicans want in this election? Tom?
I think your last statement is correct. I think it's what his audience tends to expect. I also think, and I totally agree with Bill, that the former president is a natural performer, and I'm not being sarcastic in using that word that way. But I think he can't escape some aspects of kind of his embedded personality. And it's his nature to kind of overact sometimes and overdo things. And dealing with an audience that's friendly and supportive, like his campaign convention audience was. I think, though, that many of his core supporters are people who are, justifiably or not, depending on their circumstances, very aggrieved people, angry about a lot of things that maybe they should be angry about, but expressing it in a vehement way. I think to that extent, he almost has to continue to be assertive as kind of a representative of a large number of American voters who think things are just not going well in the country and in their own areas. I do think, though, there's a real serious danger, politically speaking, for his campaign and for his possible victory in November, if he overdoes the, my word, maybe judgmental, the sexist rhetoric about the vice president. I think people, to an extent, tolerate that. But I think when you're talking about such a large number of voters, women voters, in the country, he'd get to a point of overdoing it probably, and possibly or probably. And that's the danger of his performative nature, I think, because he might get a reaction in a crowd that seems very affirmative, But I think you reach a point at which it's seen as just plain old-fashioned bashing and plain old-fashioned sexism. And I think there's something about the Harris candidacy that, again, our public attention spans are so brief these days, who knows how long it'll last. There's such a fascination on the part of many voters with having a major party have a female candidate for president that, and I think that's understandable, that if he beats up, as he's done on other people over the years, he may overreach badly with the audience. Sure. And that's the other side of his performative nature, it seems to me.
Bill, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what Tom says. I think on the first point, I think it was the chattering class that created this image that somehow after the shooting we were going to have a new Trump. Obviously, Trump didn't think we were going to have a new Trump because he was willing to be a new Trump for about a half hour, and he became the old Trump for an hour. So I think I don't think he necessarily was one. He obviously did buy into that. I'm the new man because God saved me, and I'm here to save you. But I agree with Tom. I think that's an important point. I'm not sure that Trump has. I mean, he has a lot of gifts, but I'm not certain he has that kind of skillful. What you need in this campaign is a certain skillfulness to be able to handle Harris and talk about her without creating the disruption that Tom is pointing to, that he might, and very likely is going to say things and do things that's going to go over the top and change some of the dynamics of the election. And I think this election is going to be what it was. I'm talking about the degree of competition. There's not a lot of volatility in this campaign. This election is always dead even, very close. Right. And the slightest ripple changes things by a few points. But I agree with Tom. I was wondering that myself, or whether, Clinton would be one. You think of people who really kind of skillful, cunning politicians, and Trump's really not that way, and that's problematic for him to have to kind of deal with Harris the way you'd have to deal with her. I think, to be able to.
And in that regard, it comes to the next question, which is a really good entry. The gloves are already off with Trump and Harris, each already trading verbal shots. Here's what Donald Trump said yesterday about the vice president. Kamala Harris is just as much of a joke as Biden is. Harris will be even worse for the people of our nation than Joe Biden. Harris has been the enabler-in-chief for Crooked Joe this entire time. They own each other's records, and there is no distance between the two. Harris must defend the failed Biden administration and her liberal, weak-on-crime record in California. And here's what Harris said about Trump. Quote, I prosecuted sex predators. Trump is one. I shut down for-profit scam colleges. He ran one. I held big banks accountable. He's owned by them. I'm not just prepared to take on Trump, I'm prepared to beat him. That is the tone of this election. And it struck me that I don't believe Joe Biden would have been able to come after Trump the way Kamala Harris already has and is continuing to do. Tom?
I agree with you. I think that's correct. I also think there's a contradiction on the part of Mr. Trump, in effect crediting with the vice president being kind of a Rasputina in the administration, at the same time claiming, some of her foes do, that she was basically a do-nothing figurehead that failed at whatever she tried to do. So she's either effective or she's not. You can't have it both ways. I do think that her law enforcement background as a California Attorney General is a strong selling point, because that office has always been institutionally very powerful, and of course it's such a huge state, huge presence internationally that it gets noticed. So I think in that kind of contest, and those posing those two different arguments, his and hers,
Right.
I think she has the stronger one. Assuming that, of course, one believes that President Trump did things wrong in those earlier cases, which I think he probably did, but that's whether his audience will not think of that way. But it's the
Sure.
great undecided mass in the middle that she's talking to, I think, and I think she's right about that.
So, Bill, this battle between the two, that's going to be the gloves off, given what's already taken place. How does that play with the electorate?
Well, I don't know. I think the electorate's kind of toned up to a lot of the noise that comes out of from the candidates. I think that what Trump and his campaign need to do, in my opinion, is to try to keep the focus. The way they win, or the way that a challenging party wins in a presidential election in the United States, is that there's disgruntlement with the way things have been and the way things are economically under the last 4 years. And Trump, and we can have a debate as to how that's going to work out. But the point is that I think the Trump people have to keep the focus on that. I think they have to, and so they need to tie her to that she's part of the Biden and what's been, and look at what's going to pay for milk and eggs. And I think it's a simple campaign and a simple message and I think it's to her advantage. It's certainly to take the campaign off that trail. But if he and his campaign need to keep it on that trail, and that's not something he likes to do, because he likes to demean people and call them names and et cetera, et cetera. When actually the question is the old Reagan question: are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? I think that's the key to the Republican victory,
right,
in November. As long as because I think that could be weakened. The inflation rate is flattening out, and maybe the Feds will lower a rate or two. So maybe that won't be as strong an argument in 3 months that it was 3 months ago. But I think that's the whole campaign, no matter what names they call each other or whatever. But I agree with you. Certainly, she has, because she was a prosecutor and she's younger and she has a voice. Certainly, she can lambaste at Trump and get under his skin and in ways that Biden certainly was not capable of.
Yeah.
Was not capable of doing.
Right.
So in that respect, yeah, she's more capable of taking a prosecutorial approach to him, which she can legitimately claim. She can do and claim that's her gift. But like I said, I don't know that the election. That's all great entertainment for the election, but I don't know that the outcome rests on that.
Right. So just before the start of the Republican convention, Donald Trump announced that Ohio's freshman U.S. Senator J.D. Vance would be his running mate. A lot of people didn't know much about Vance, and so he sort of introduced himself to the delegates and the national audience about his blue-collar roots and his upbringing and his struggles, and then all of that, the biography that he has put together. Two things, and Tom, I'd like you to start, is were you surprised that Trump picked Vance to be his running mate? And is Vance's biography, the one that he has written about himself, is that going to bring on much more scrutiny now, where a lot of people are beginning to question some of the things, some of the stories he's told about growing up, etc.? So talk about this whole Vance phenomenon, if you will.
Well, first of all, at the risk of making a fool of myself more than usual, I spent a little bit of time with him about 2 years ago, not a huge amount of time, just one-on-one. And I think he's a truly fascinating person.
Mm.
I say that not meaning I think it's good fascination or bad fascination, but fascinating. Number two, I'm kind of surprised, I was kind of surprised Mr. Trump chose him because, frankly, looking at them strictly as a package of personalities, I think Senator Vance is a far more engaging person than the president is, former president is. And so knowing that the former president has a view of himself as the center of the universe, any other planets that get too close to the sun or are seen as deflecting attention from the sun can get burned pretty badly. Thirdly, of course, there will be, and should be, critical, not revisionism, but analysis and examination of the senator's autobiography. That will happen anyway. But I do think that in the broader outlines of someone coming from a very difficult personal circumstance to getting where he got, the basic outline is accurate, I think. Now, one of the ironies, of course, is people will say, and I wrote this recently in these terms, that he's a sheer opportunist, that he has shaped and shifted his politics, Mr. Vance has, depending on prevailing winds in his party. But without saying I never found any politician unlike this, I think that opportunism is the nature of party politics in this country.
Right.
And for policy holders. That said, and I try to convey this, but I don't do a very good job of it when I write about it because it gets a little bit too abstract, I suppose, and that's my Achilles heel. I do think that Vance has a policy perspective on the economy and on the backgrounds that we ourselves know from being where we're from, but working class people, that has a real substance to it. That is to say, there's a core of genuineness there. That's my opinion, though. I can't say I can measure that one way or the other. Now, I guess what I wanted to follow up on was kind of anticipating something you might have been wondering. The question is whether or not Senator Vance, as a candidate for vice president, does have enough impact in places like Pennsylvania, Michigan,
Right.
and so forth, Wisconsin, to sway any blue collar or any other kind of voters in favor of Mr. Trump as opposed to being against Mr. Trump. That I can't know because I don't know who Miss Harris is going to pick as her running
Right.
mate. That's the other question. But I think one thing I will tell you, I think no matter what happens this November, that J.D. Vance is going to be a notable figure in American politics for a long time to come. And that's just what I think.
Right.
And I'm often wrong, but never in doubt. So I hasten to add that. Nevertheless, that's what I think.
Bill, the Vance pick.
Well, I didn't know who he was going to pick. I was surprised he picked. I was surprised he picked Vance. My view of it, I think it's pretty common textbook view. Vice presidents really don't matter very much today. Anyway, I mean, Lyndon Johnson might have mattered. Overall, I don't know that. A lot of times, picking a vice president causes a disturbance in your campaign. You look at McGovern. Remember his first pick, they had to take him out because he was getting electric shock treatments.
Right.
Sarah Palin certainly didn't work. Was not a very positive assistance to that campaign. But I think so. They got over this. He's not going to be a problem. What I thought, I read Tom's column. But what I thought when I listened to him when he spoke, because I didn't know much about him even, but anyway, I listened to him, and I thought I was talking to a Pat Buchanan who was smiling. He didn't have that kind of nastiness.
Yes.
You know, Buchanan was great, but he said the same things. You know, he's isolation, protectionist, kind of. We want to go back to the 50s, back to the, the nuclear family. All of this kind of stuff is not going to happen. That old photograph he's talking about is not going to be refreshed. But still, I think he delivered that, and I think a lot of people like that, respond to that message, and I think he does have a kind of a political philosophy. One of one of the points I wanted to bring up, I did read, as I said, I read Tom's column, but one of the things that interested me is think about this, that when the 98-year-old veteran spoke, he used this phrase, I didn't catch, he said, I can't remember what he said, the United States is not just an idea, it's a nation. Now, if you remember that, and then Vance used the same term. He said the United, it might have said America, but I think it's the United States, not an idea, it's a nation. So,
right.
so that's a very loaded phrase, I think, for these people. It means something. So there's some kind of as Tom sort of pointed out in his column, there's a kind of political philosophy embedded in this guy, and so that's what I think. It's sort of interesting. We'll see how that all unfolds as this moves forward. I don't know that he matters. I don't know that his place on a ticket's going to do them any good in Michigan or Pennsylvania, or not going to do them any harm. I don't know. It's the president. He's a presidential campaign. Vice presidents don't. I don't think they really. I don't know if they're worth 1 or 2% of the vote, unless they cause you some campaign disturbance, which I don't think, at least for the Republicans, they're going to have any problems. And I think there was. I don't want to take up time, but I think there was a little concern. But I think Tom has addressed it. I think there was a little concern that Vance would say something that would be disturbing to the campaign. But he's so obsequious to the whole deal, sort of so careful to be the second banana. I don't really, he's smarter than to come out with some kind of outrageous statement. But and one other thought I had about it is, I think one of the reasons he got picked is because he has ties to the elite on the West Coast, and he can raise money from those people. And I think they had a lot to do with him being picked. I think his role is as significant in raising money as it is at doing campaigning, and he can get to those people and get the money from them. And I'm not certain Trump is kind of aligned with that kind of new thinking with this guy is. So I think they're going to feel better about antitrust against all of these new Microsoft powerhouses in this country.
Yeah, but even though Vance has denigrated elites, and actually in his speech talked about Wall Street types, etc. You're right, Bill. That's it. But you mentioned Pat Buchanan, and it struck me because I also recall Pat Buchanan talking about cultural purity and even racial purity,
he avoided that
in his vision of America. And it's noteworthy that Vance's wife is South Asian Indian whose parents immigrated from India, and Kamala Harris, her father's Jamaican and her mother's South Asian Indian. And it struck me when I was watching the convention, and I'm speaking and talk about this through the lens of a brown-skinned person. I'm watching the convention hall as after his speech, Vance is on stage, and his wife comes up to him, and he kisses her on the lips. And it struck me that I was thinking there are a hell of a lot of people in that audience who've never seen a white man kiss a brown woman in public, and because if you looked at the delegates to the Republican convention, it certainly wasn't a melting pot. It certainly wasn't. I mean, there was a predominance of whites in that audience.
Well, just let me interfere one point. But there were people there with tattoos on, and they were not there in the Republican Party 30 years ago. This is a different Republican Party.
Exactly.
It's the people with the tattoos that are the core of this voting bloc. I'm not making fun of them. I'm just saying, if you're looking at it, you have to look at what you see, and you see something much different than you saw. These are not suit and tie people. These were people who were proud of their tattoos. Some of them, which you would never see that in the Republican Party that I was in.
Tom?
I'm sorry, I took that off.
Right.
So how does Vance's personal life, his having a South South Asian Indian wife and mixed race children. How does that play in Donald Trump's Republican Party?
If you're asking me, I don't know one way or the other, although it seems to me that it appears to be a happy union, the marriage, and the children are attractive young children. And you can make a case, again, I know it may be a reach with the current inclinations of the Republican Party nationally, but you could in fact see them as a couple, as exemplars of the American success story.
Right.
She coming from parents who were from overseas originally, he coming from old stock American people from Kentucky originally, and being a very successful guy that I have to say seems to have gotten where he got because of his brains and his tenacity. And in that respect, I think it's probably a positive story for many people, even though they're not Junior Ward Cleaver living in some kind of a lily white environment necessarily, socially or otherwise. I do think, and I'm around a lot of younger people because of my teaching work, as Bill was at one time. I do think that when people look at environments such as couples or families and so forth that are of different cultural backgrounds, that there is more understanding than not and more acceptance than not typically, than otherwise it used to be. I could be wrong, but I think that to that extent, the story is kind of a storybook story about American success. And if you buy into the opportunity argument Republicans make, both the senator and his spouse have done well by the opportunities America's offered their families and themselves. That doesn't mean the conclusions they draw politically are necessarily the ones I share, but I think that came across that way. I agree with you, though. I was watching the speech he made and Mr. and Mrs. Vance tweeting each other. I was wondering to some extent what a non-diverse, and it was, audience would be thinking about that.
Yeah.
But I think that in his story especially is so compelling. We've all seen people in those settings in different poor environments and have somehow leapfrogged ahead based on their tenacity, that it's interesting. Also, we know that our country will be minority white Anglo-Saxon not too far in the future. So I think that in many respects, their family setting is kind of an archetype for what we're going to see more and more of. And I think that's a good thing. And I also think that that seeing someone who seems to have a normal family life, whatever normal means anymore, is probably a good archetype politically to maintain.
Bill?
I don't think it, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I don't think it matters. I don't think that the fact that she's Indian has any significant impact on his campaign one way or another.
And yet there are a growing number of Donald Trump supporters who have bought into this great replacement theory that took root in Europe and is now spreading in America, which is what Tom talked about, the warning that whites are going to be a minority unless something is done to curb non-European immigration, unless something is done to, to sort of increase the white birth rate and all of those kinds of things. And that is a real issue for a growing number of people in this country, right? Tom?
Well,
oh, Bill, go ahead.
No, I don't. I think that I don't know what Trump will do for it. He likes the border issue, so that's part of the unstated part of the border issue. So they'll keep banging away on me.
Right.
Building a wall.
Yes.
Shipping people back. Sending people back. They like that.
Yes.
Round them up and send them back.
11 million.
Yeah, round them up, send them back. So, because they're criminals.
Yes. Yes. Tom?
Most of them, any of them.
Well, I was simply going to add that I think that there's a kind of determinism economically about immigration, especially from South Asia. And as long as, and this will continue, I think, indefinitely, as long as our country needs and welcomes people like engineers, scientists, physicians, technological people, and entrepreneurial people, the flow of people from, say, South Asia to America is going to continue. The rhetoric can be what the rhetoric is, but as long as Silicon Valley and the Cleveland Clinic and Microsoft needs people with the skill set and this kind of work ethic, they're going to be coming here and continuing amounts. And so, in one respect, what we're hearing about people talking about great replacement theory is a kind of nostalgia for what, in many ways, never was about our country.
Right.
But will never be again anyway, no matter what they say or do about it. I think there's an interesting article you may have seen, by the way. I'm not sure where it ran. I read so much I forget where I saw things about, incidentally, the growing political presence in America, in both parties really, of Indian Americans.
Yes.
Which I thought was very interesting. And I've known in a retail level,
Right.
from being around Columbus and so forth, and in greater Cleveland, how true that is. I think it's a very interesting phenomenon. And one that shows the ways in which new Americans, quote unquote, integrate themselves into the structure of politics in our country, which means there's going to be some modification of some of these crazy views about people coming here to live and work.
And Bill knows firsthand about the outreach to Indian Americans when you were involved with the Voinovich campaign. And George Voinovich made a very, very, aggressive reach to the Asian Indian community. My God, I mean, you know that, and he not only did he benefit with a lot of money from them.
Yeah, that's the key. That's the key. That was the key, Bertram. They as a group, they collected a lot of money and donated a lot of money to their favorite campaigns, and now they're very representative in most boards and commissions in the great state of Ohio.
Yep.
But I wanted to touch on another issue.
Now, before we move on, Bill, just let me say one story that did not get a lot of legs that I believe should have had reporters' attention was when Donald Trump announced that he believes that foreign students who graduate from American universities should automatically qualify for green cards. And that didn't get a lot of attention, but it speaks to exactly what Tom was talking about. He recognizes the need for this kind of brain trust that these foreign students provide, especially in high-tech industries and engineering and all of that. Right, Bill? You being a college professor.
I think that. I think what you see with Trump once in a while, and that's a good example, is that he'll say some outrageous things like he does about immigrants, but then somebody talks to him, and so then he sticks a footnote. He sticks a footnote into the theme like this. This is a footnote to the theme. Well, we're really not for these immigrants, but the footnote is any of them that graduate from MIT will get a green card.
Exactly.
So you see that quite often with him. That somebody, he catches the message eventually. He's too much on this, and so he needs to throw in a qualifier. I don't think that was a big issue, but I think it does speak to Trump.
I'm sorry, Bill. I interrupted you. You were going to, and I don't.
Yeah, I wanted to. I've been on this since we're making predictions about Harris's vice presidential.
Right.
Yeah, and it seemed obvious to me, and I've seen this with other political scientists, that one of the best choices, maybe not the best, is Shapiro.
Yes.
Because he is a very popular governor of the most important state in this election.
Yes.
But there's a minor problem. He's Jewish.
Yeah.
Now he is not going. She is snubbing Netanyahu tomorrow night. So what I'm wondering about, and of course that affects Michigan. The Jewish question electorally, I mean, it has other implications, but electorally it affects Michigan. So you get too far on the side of Israel, and you get the Arab population of Michigan stirred up. So I'm just really curious how she manages that, or whether she just avoids it, whether they won't pick him, or if she does pick him, I think there's going to be some remnants of that. There could be protests. You know, a lot of the tent cities and the universities were Hamas promoters, supporters, or Palestinian promoters, and if she picks a Jewish vice president, a candidate, is that going to create? I'm just stirring up a little noise here because that interests me as an issue going, because he's the obvious to me. If I was her political, hey, Shapiro's the number one guy. And even the polls show that.
Right.
That's the way you're going to get. That's the best way of Pennsylvania is to take Shapiro, and that's one of the keys to your presidency. But here's a footnote over here. You're going to have some other side political problems. Is that going to X Shapiro on the list? That's a question. I don't know what you all think of that. I thought I'd bring that up since that's been my latest thing to fool around in my mind.
What do you think, Tom, about the vice presidential pick?
I thought it was interesting today, I think it's today, that the Israeli Prime Minister is going to be addressing a Congress. I think it's today or tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
The president has arranged not to be there.
You're right.
Which, I mean, I totally understand why she's doing. I think I do, without trying to be a mind reader. I think Bill raises a good point, though, and I think one of the overarching areas of reckoning on foreign policy for both parties' campaigns, is going to be how we as a nation address an increasingly, I would say, unstable circumstance in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And there are all kinds of cross currents there: ethnic, religious, philosophical, geopolitical. And I think the angle that Bill mentioned about the governor of Pennsylvania's faith tradition is worth considering vis-a-vis Michigan, certainly. On the other hand, you have to wonder, and I don't know the demographics on this at all, to what extent party registration among Arab Americans in Michigan is one way or the other, for one party or the other.
Right.
And/or the extent to which what appears to be Trump's commitment, and that's a word I'm using deliberately, toward the survival and defense of Israel, will also be a factor in what Arab Americans in Michigan decide to do about voting. But I have to agree that in many ways, the governor of Pennsylvania would be an ideal running mate, all things considered. But that's a factor in Michigan, certainly.
So the whole tenor of the Democratic convention has changed. There was concern if Joe Biden had stayed on and refused to step aside, etc., as to what was going to happen at that convention in August. Now there seems to be a lot of excitement. I mean, the $100 million that they raised in a matter of hours is very impressive. And I'm sure when Biden shows up at the convention, I mean, he is going to be beloved, and it's going to be. So coming out of the Republican convention, there was no doubt that Trump and Vance, certainly got a huge boost from the convention. Do you believe that Kamala Harris and whoever her vice presidential running mate is will get that similar kind of boost from the Democratic convention? Bill?
Yes. I mean, this is part of something political science. This is in the political science textbook. That the the party that has a convention in the week or two afterwards, they get a bounce in the poll, but it's temporary. So that we would expect to see, although, we've had this change because of the Biden, but we would expect to see polls coming out since the Republican convention where Trump got maybe a 3 to 5% boost in the polls. But we political science expect that dissipates over maybe a month or so. So we would expect the same thing to happen in August or late August, because they dominate the news, and all the news that they get out is generally favorable, and it's positive. So they're going to get a 5% bounce. But again, that's going to fade, and we're going to get back to the normal polling difference between the parties and the candidates, which probably is going to be what it has been, and it's minuscule. And at this election, it's going to go down to a few votes here and there.
Right. Tom?
But the convention has a bounce. We put that in there. That's in the text.
Sure. Tom?
Well, I think the circumstances the Democrats face right now, with basically a nominee chosen for president, it's going to be a chance to use their convention as a way of introducing people to the vice president to a greater extent than they may know her now. Certainly, if the President Biden had stayed in, there would have been a lot of dissension, a lot of picketing, a lot of who knows what else at the convention, which would have shown a disunited Democratic Party. So unless, which we never know anymore with the news cycle what it is, unless something outrageous blows up between now and then, the convention is going to be about, meet Kamala Harris and her background and her family and her husband and all that sort of thing, as opposed to a contentious gathering. I think it will be a net positive for the Democrats. But again, as you both have pointed out, there tends to be a bounce, but it tends to be short-lived after each party convenes. Certainly, I thought that, but for the President Trump's long-winded oration, the Republicans had a successful convention. And from that point of view, the staging and so forth. And Democrats, I think, are positioned to do the same right now based on the fact that there seems to be over with, as far as the presidency is concerned, nomination, and the suspense will be, so to speak, about the VP nomination and so forth. We also don't know what's going to happen in the Middle East between now and then, which will be a factor influencing our perception as Americans of foreign policy. But I think the Democrats have an advantage right now because they rule their conventions going into the Labor Day area, which is kind of a traditional time. People get serious about campaigns.
Right. Well, gentlemen, thank you again. Wonderful conversation. Let's get together after the Democratic convention, and then we can chat some more and see what happens. But this is an ever-changing story, but thank you both for your great insight. We'll talk again. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. It's always to see you both.
Thanks.
Bye.
I'll see you. Thank you.